Welcome to 805 Sports Talk, and we thought we were done with our basketball coverage, but it's continuing some this week, and we'll have a little bit next week as well. We're going to publish our all-area boys basketball team this weekend, so we're going to spend some time this week on the show talking about some of our selections, some of the tougher decisions to make, and just highlighting some of the top boys basketball players that we saw this season. It was kind of a tough MVP choice this year with so many teams making deep playoff runs. Some teams were hurt by getting knocked out early on in the playoffs. I think a lot of us probably thought Leandrew Knight was a favorite once again, leading Cabrillo to a great regular season, but of course that tough playoff loss dinged him a bit, and we have some teams like Santa Maria and Lompoc making deep playoff runs. Those guys kind of stated their case to be MVP, so the playoffs do impact who we choose for all our area teams, so that's a lot of fun. I know some people just try to make it a regular season award, but we kind of already have those regular season awards with the all-league stuff, so it's fun to kind of take playoffs into it a little bit. Kenny, we'll start with you. I know we had a couple guys from Santa Maria that we really liked. Lompoc made a deep run. There had to be a valuable player over there as well. What was kind of your decision-making process through all of that?
It was hard. I tended to like favor a bit the guys on teams that made the big postseason run. They didn't quite do what they were expected to do, exceeded that a little bit. Cabrillo, let's be honest, was expected to do a lot more than they did in the first round. It is true they had a tough first-round matchup, but they were playing at home, and they fell a little short. Joey Navarez, I thought, was a very good candidate, even though they went out in the first round. I still thought Leandrew Knight was a very good candidate. I thought Blake Truitt was up there in the mix. Clark Kringle and Jordan Tyler with their defense were worthy. So a lot of worthy considerations this year, I thought.
Lorenzo, you covered the Lompoc Valley heavily. Did you think the all-area MVP would kind of rest over there in Lompoc Valley at one point this season? Do you think with the runs the Braves made, the Saints made, it kind of made it more difficult? What was kind of your whole process working through that?
Yeah, I had Leandrew Knight as a lock, but then came that Arroyo Grande game where, literally a turnover shifted the momentum of that contest, but that's not taking away the job Leandrew Knight did throughout the whole season, especially with staying healthy, which is one of the hardest things to do in a sport like basketball, especially with the way it's structured. But Andrew Villa, I think, is a name that I should mention for Lompoc because, in playing in Paul Tarona's system, how he likes to get up and go, Villa really embraced that and became that sharp shooting guard that Taronas was looking for. So Villa really turned it on late toward the end of the year. You can also argue that Jordan Tyler, even despite the fact he didn't play a full year, he clearly did make a huge impact on that defense, especially in that San Bernardino Aquinas game where there was that crucial block that really brought the momentum back to the Lompoc side. So, toward the end, once it was the playoffs, it became a lot harder for me to really digest who should get the MVP nod.
Yeah, and this is the second year in a row that we've had a tough time picking that MVP. Last year, obviously, it was JoJo Walker and Leandrew Knight kind of going head-to-head, and JoJo had an injury late in the season, and that kind of derailed his chances, but, he's won the All-Area MVP award before. It seemed like Leandrew was going to win it again, but that early playoff exit does hurt some guys, especially when you have some teams making deep runs. And talking about that, and Coach of the Year was also a tough choice this year. Paul Tarona's first-year guy, leading his team to the semifinals in a tough division. That was no easy feat for him. And then you have a guy like Dave Yamati, fourth-year coach working with his senior class that had been with him the whole time, making the semifinals and coming so close to a championship game. A last-second shot was just tough. So you have Taronas and Yamati. I think those were the two easy choices, and then making a choice between those two was actually a difficult task. Defensive Player of the Year as well was a tough one with Jordan Tyler. Clark Kringle won the league All-LPL Defensive Player of the Year award, so that was a tough decision. Tyler wasn't able to play a whole season with him transferring. I think Austin Olsen had an argument as well with how well he played. He didn't get a chance to play a whole season as well after transferring from Rigetti. So there were so many good players, good coaching performances, defensively, offensively. It was definitely a tough process to work through it all, but we will have our whole package this weekend on Sunday, so be looking out for that. Elliot, moving on to you, what was some of your tough decisions you had to make? Who are some guys that you were looking at to kind of honor with our all-area teams this year?
We were talking about Leandro Knight, and what went into my thinking was how far did you go in the playoffs? They play each other in the leagues twice a year. Cabrillo had a nice season, but I think they should have gone further in the playoffs. And then both Lompoc and Santa Maria had major upsets to get to the semifinals. It wasn't as though it was 1 versus 16 and they were the one. Santa Maria had to knock off the number 1 seed to get into the semifinals, and they were definitely the underdogs all the way to that point. So, and including that point. So, I'm looking at the guys that they rode to get there, like Blake Truitt for Santa Maria, and then with the coaches, you had 2 really good jobs. Lompoc with Toronis. They were in a bigger division, and I thought that even though their record wasn't quite as good as Santa Maria's, was 20-8. I thought that and Santa Maria had a couple upsets. The upsets were bigger, going against the bigger schools, but it came down to the coaches of Santa Maria and Lompoc, David Yamati and Paul Toronis. And Toronis did it in his first year. Now, he'd been a coach there. His wife is a coach there. It's no stranger to the sport, but his first year as the head coach, I think he did a very good job, an excellent job. And then back to the players, too. One of the things that we put in, remember now, this is our all area, and the area includes little schools like Valley Christian and Dunn. And we saw a couple of really good players there. They don't play quite the competition that Lompoc, Cabrillo, Santa Maria, Righetti play, but that's still small school level. And each of those schools had a great kid, Isaac Deming at Valley Christian and John Janjul at Dunn, and the Janjul, it's actually Sanjul, had just a great season and a great playoff run, and he transferred from Mission Prep down there, a kid from Arroyo Grande. So I'm glad we consider kids like that as part of the mix, because they do play in the Central Coast, and Sanjul played on a Mission Prep team, so he can play with the big schools, but he chose to transfer over to the smaller school. But those are the kinds of things that go into it. Just the big schools, small schools, what kind of playoff runs they made. And as you said before, the all LPL and the all Pac-8, they did their votes. And we kind of look at that as a basis for, all right, this is who the leagues think, the coaches think are the best in their leagues. Most of the time we pick from those kids. So, and it was tough, but I think and there were some unanimous votes, but they weren't all. We all have different points of view, and I don't want to give away any of the winners, but we have talked about the favorites like Joey Navarez and Leandro Knight and Clark Kringle, Blake Truitt. Those guys, Elihu Cobb for St. Joe, all had great seasons, and they were all in the mix in our discussions, and we have to vote, and we did.
I will add this about Paul Toronis. Here's a thing to keep in mind. He took over a program that was 6-20 the previous year and went through a coaching change. Not only that, Toronis is a football guy, so realistically, he can't get into basketball mode until the football season is over for the Braves. So, I mean, it just adds to the leverage of the job that Toronis did.
All right, and that will publish this weekend, so keep an eye out for that. And then next week, we're going to be talking about the girls' all-area team. That's a tough one to decide as well, with so many outstanding performances on that end. Erin Jenkins leading her team to a championship game. Zane Sheckard had a great season over there at Righetti. They made the semifinals, so that was a tough decision to make as well. So see who we picked the following week on the girls' side of things, and now we're going to move over to prep football. It was kind of exciting. Earlier this week, we saw a finalized football schedule with Cabrillo tweeting out their finalized football schedule. Even though it's late March, we're still excited for the football season. So it's cool to kind of, this is the time of year we're starting to look at the schedule, see what some of the big games are going to be, see when the seasons are starting, and we start marking those dates on our calendars. So Lorenzo, what did you think of Cabrillo's football schedule when you got a peek at that? New leagues, a lot of different matchups this year. I think the football season obviously is going to have a much different look. What was your kind of first thought?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, Cabrillo's really beefing up that schedule. I mean, week 1 against Bishop Diego, the defending state champs. So you could tell, I've seen a lot of the tweets on the Cabrillo football account. They're spending a lot of time in the weight room, making sure that they actually match up muscle-wise against Bishop Diego. But another opponent I also want to mention on Cabrillo's in Rio Mesa. Rio Mesa had an amazing year. Granted, the Spartans look like they're going to be a lot younger this time around, so maybe, and plus the fact it's a home game for Cabrillo, maybe there's some leverage there. But I also want to add 2 more games that I'm really looking forward to down the road. Lompoc has scheduled Centennial Bakersfield. I mean, we've seen Lompoc go against Frontier. Granted, Rich Cornfield was a Lompoc guy, so there's the leverage in getting that matchup there. But, Centennial has some intriguing prospects, and it's the alma mater of Cody Kessler. Mm-hmm. Then you also have Central Valley Christian against St. Joseph, which is going to be a huge early test about what the Central section is going to be like with CVC. And knowing and covering CVC briefly, they got some meat over there. They got some size.
Yeah, kind of with Lompoc playing a Central section Bakersfield school, it's kind of like, if you're going to schedule these guys, why didn't you guys just come over to the Central section anyways and stay there and make it easier for us where we don't have to cover Southern section football, Central section football, and all that stuff. But I think that's going to be a fun matchup. I don't know how that one's going to go. Obviously, at this point, you don't know how those 2 teams will match up. But, Centennial has a great history of football with Cody Kessler playing there. So yeah, that's going to be a fun matchup. And Frontier is given some trouble to these Lompoc Valley teams before. We've seen that those Bakersfield schools can, definitely bring it, when they play those Lompoc schools. And I think we're going to see a lot of those matchups with our Santa Maria schools playing some of those Central Valley teams. You mentioned the CVC matchup. That's going to be tough. And St. Joseph's schedule as a whole is really interesting this year with them moving into the new league, the more difficult league. They're going to have AG, Atascadero, Paso, Rigetti all in that mountain league. So I think St. Joseph is a team that I think it steps up a bit for them. Some of these teams, the league isn't going to be as difficult, but I think St. Joseph kind of takes it up another notch, and that's good for them. They really dominated, I think, the LPL the last few years, obviously except playing Lompoc. They had a tough one against Santa Ynez last year, but, they really had an easy time playing some of those Cabrillo PV teams in the LPL the last couple of years. So I think that's a good step for the Knights to play in that more difficult league.
And keep in mind, too, St. Joseph is going into Division 1 of the Central section. I know I mentioned that before, but you got the Clovis schools, especially Clovis West and Buchanan. Buchanan bringing back Kendall Milton for the next 2 years. You also got Central High, the team that made a deep state run as well, and Central High is always loaded with talent. So, maybe the CVC game will be a blessing in disguise for St. Joseph because, given the fact that CVC plays Division 4, they were the runner-up against Golden West, the same Golden West team that beat Big Bear, the Big Bear team that beat Santa Maria. But got a feeling CVC will eventually move up to Division 3. So, maybe this might work for St. Joseph, but yeah. I just feel like they're not in the right league.
I don't see St. Joseph being a Division 1 Central section team. Bakersfield High, you mentioned Buchanan, Clovis, some of those Clovis schools, those are legit, programs. St. Joseph is obviously a legit program, but they're a bit smaller, have some smaller players, have a different system. I've seen some of those top tier Central section teams play. I'm not sure St. Joseph will match up with them. Maybe they want to get to that point, so they're going to start there at Division 1 and maybe build up to it where they can compete there, but I don't see it quite yet.
They're going to be the only private school in Division 1 too. San Joaquin Memorial is not even in Division 1.
Yeah, so Kenny, moving to you, we've seen some of these league setups now. We're getting closer and closer to that season started. What do you think it's going to be like, for us covering it, for the teams playing it? It's just a whole different vibe to it this year. What are some of your early thoughts?
Well, over the years, I've heard a few people around here grumble that St. Joseph really should be playing in the Pac-5 League, and now in effect those people will be getting their wish.
Yeah.
They'll play every old Pac-5 League team except San Luis Obispo, all of whom have had at least a fair amount of success at some point in the Pac-5. I'm not sure in recent memory if Atascadero has won a league title, but in past years they've always been at least in the upper echelon league. And I know that at least in recent memory, Arroyo Grande, Paso Robles, and Rigetti have all won league titles in that league or some version of that league. So I think that will be a real interesting league. I agree with Joe. I don't think St. Joseph belongs in Division I. I think they're a Division II Central Section team, but Division I is where the Knights were put. I think that Ocean League, I think that looks interesting. You have a mix of some it's a mix of teams that weren't all in the same league before. San Luis Obispo was in a different league. So, and Tony Dodge typically has his guys ready by league time, so I see Napomo being competitive in that league again. Some of the other teams are going through some rebuilding, so Napomo, I think, has a chance to do really well in that league again. I think Lompoc will run over the Channel League again the same way they ran over the LPL. San Ynez, I think, should be in the mix for a playoff spot just as they have in the past. Dos Pueblos and Santa Barbara really seem to be hit and miss. Some years their programs are good, some years not so good. I know San Marcos typically struggles.
And keep in mind, Dos Pueblos is going without Nate Mendoza as well, so they're undergoing a transition period, especially heading into this new league.
Yeah, Nate Mendoza, the Lompoc High grad, has done a really good job over there at DP, but he's kind of stepped aside to pursue, administration job and stuff like that. So I don't know if Dos Pueblos is going to be there, but I think Santa Ynez has to like the new look of this league. A bigger, different league gives them a better chance to make the Southern Section playoffs. I think it's more of a natural fit for Santa Ynez playing some of those Santa Barbara area schools. It's good for them. They were in the LPL where they would have to play Napomo and some of those other, northern teams. So I think this is a good fit for Santa Ynez geographically and competitive-wise. So I think that's good for them. We mentioned the Cabrillo-Bishop Diego matchup early on in the season, but I would love to see a Lompoc-Bishop Diego matchup at some point. That would be a really good matchup. I think those teams would just make for a great rivalry, but I don't know if we'll get that at some point, maybe later down the road. I know Lompoc does have a hard time scheduling a lot of games, so maybe at some point we'll see that. But the Channel League still kind of looks like the LPL for Lompoc in terms of competition. They should be able to kind of roll through that, assuming things kind of stay the same over there at Lompoc. Ocean League looks to be a lot of fun. I think that's kind of really balanced. I think SLO really benefits from playing in that league. They did not belong in that Pac-5 league over the last couple of years. Talking about St. Joseph, we can't forget that Dustin Davis did lead the Knights to a Pac-7 league title. I think that's what it was called. I think that was his second or third year over there at St. Joseph. They did win a Pac-7 league title, so I think they can compete with some of those Mountain League teams, and that seems some balance. So I think we have a little bit more balance. Bigger leagues, it should be a lot of fun. Nothing really jumps out at me at that Channel League that looks like to be a lot of fun. I don't know if the rivalries will be impacted a whole lot. We should still have a lot of those rivalry games. They may not. They're going to be league games now. They might, that might change things a little bit. So I think we're going to still have a lot of the games we like to see and a lot of big games, a lot of big rivalry games. So there's going to be some getting used to, but I think we're still going to have a lot of really good matchups.
And we haven't seen the complete schedules yet, too, so the preseason could look a lot like the preseason has. Just because they're playing their playoffs over in the Central Valley doesn't mean they have to play the preseason games, although they'll probably add more of those Central Valley teams to the preseason rather than driving down to Santa Barbara. They'll go east. But if you look at it, I'm concerned about St. Joe and Righetti, but not so much because they're going to be in this new Mountain League, because I think they can compete, but they've got new coaches. They're going to install new systems. And St. Joe lost its quarterback to graduation, so they're going to have to, they've got a junior that's going to move in, but they're going to have to get used to a whole new system. Righetti may benefit more because Tony Payne, their new coach, has been with them, and he's been a head coach before, and he's a graduate, and he has a passion for the Warriors, and so I don't rule them out. It's just going to be a whole new learning curve for everybody in those schools. I got to think San Luis Obispo is getting a break moving into this Ocean League, because they're sort of classified as the bigger school like AG, Atascadero, Paso, and Righetti, but they got clobbered the last few years by them and lost to some of the smaller schools like Morro Bay. So this will give them a break when it comes to league play. We haven't mentioned Pioneer Valley. I'm wondering if they're going to be licking their chops in this new league, because they could they could compete with Santa Maria, which is losing a lot of seniors. Morro Bay, Templeton, Napomo, Tony Dodge, you said, always brings the kids, gets them ready to play. But I'm thinking Pioneer Valley over there. Robert Ruiz is thinking, or John Ruiz is thinking, this is our league for the taking. And Lompoc is Lompoc, at this point, we're talking about new coaches at some schools. They don't have a new coach. They just reload, and they don't particularly care who they play in the league, but they're not in a league with some of the big schools that are down there. They're in a league with schools similar to them in size, like Dos Pueblos and Santa Barbara. I don't see anybody being competition for them. They haven't in the past. I don't see where Andrew Jones is going to take his foot off the gas pedal until the fourth quarter of any game.
It would have been more fun to see Nate Mendoza come back at least another year.
Yeah.
That way it becomes Nate Mendoza versus Andrew Jones' former teammates. But, I mean, Doug Keynes seems like he's the guy in Dos Pueblos, and Keynes has been successful before at Santa Barbara. But, again, I'm with you guys. I mean, I still believe that the Channel League is still Lompoc's to lose. And, even with this deep senior class already graduating, you still get Leandre Coleman back. You still get Jacob Nunez back as well, so there's still some talented pieces.
He's always got players in his pocket. He's got freshmen that he'll plug in. He's got some sophomores that'll see more time. We see it every year. New names all of a sudden that are not new to Andrew Jones. They just finished fourth quarters of games or spent a year on the JV. I don't worry about Andrew Jones and what he's going to do next year. I worry for the other teams. One of the things we were talking about, who benefits, well, I don't know if you say Lompoc benefits, but everybody that they play doesn't benefit. They're going to, I'd like to see A.J. Pateras at Cabrillo. He's got him in the weight rooms. He's working hard. But it's a process, and he's pointed to Dan Ellington's process at Santa Maria High School and how it's been a progression every year and how great they did last year, and he's trying to get his kids on that same kind of track. So I'm thinking year 2 will be better, but I don't think he's ready to knock off Lompoc yet.
Cabrillo also scheduled Buena, which I think is a very interesting matchup. And here's another thing to also consider. AJ Pateras knows Buena quite well because he was at Ventura, and as you know, Ventura and Buena, that's the oldest rivalry in the city of Ventura.
Well, they play on the same field like Lompoc and Cabrillo, and I've been to that field, and it's miserable. It's like playing at Cabrillo's field, and Cabrillo won't even play on Cabrillo's field. It's like rock hard and dirt. So,
Buena has a pretty salty football tradition.
Yeah, but he does know. He does know
that could be a tough matchup for them.
Yeah, that might be one team we're kind of overlooking with this new alignment that they could benefit. There's no St. Joseph there. Pioneer Valley kind of had over on Cabrillo the last couple of years, so maybe Cabrillo can kind of slide in there and develop into the third or maybe even second best team in that league over a couple of years. So yeah, I think Cabrillo, if we did see some flashes last year with the quarterback play that they had, and Pateras kind of heading in the right direction. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do kind of benefit from this new look. I think San Ynez is definitely proven itself to be the second best team in that league by looking at it. Dos Pueblos is right there, but talking about that coaching change, we're not sure how that's going to pan out. So we got about 5 months till the football season kicks off. So we do have some time to kind of learn more about these teams and keep talking about this stuff until we actually do get some football here. We got plenty of basketball action to talk about. Obviously, it is March, and it's been, I don't know if you would categorize it a great tournament. It's definitely been a notable tournament with some of the historic upsets that we've seen. Last Friday, we were all talking about UMBC with its win over Virginia, the first ever men's team beating a 16, beating a 1. That was crazy. Nevada making this crazy comeback against Cincinnati, making the Sweet 16. It's just been definitely a memorable tournament. Conference bracket is really something to look at this point. Lorenzo, we'll start with you. How would you kind of sum up, the first couple of rounds here of this NC2A tournament?
I heard the sound of millions of toilets flushing with the NCAA brackets going inside. That's how it was, but you must be Cinderella. That was the acronym for UMBC, and not only that, they immediately won me over. I mean, I think this is something that you've been, as a college basketball fan, you've been wanting to see this for years. I mean, it seemed like the most impossible thing to do was seeing a 16 seed get the upper hand against a 1 seed. I think it was 1989. Princeton was a 16 seed going against Georgetown, and Princeton actually very, very nearly won that game. I think they lost by 1, but a lot of college basketball purists look at that game as the game that really brought out March Madness, and that also led to the chain reaction of some of these lower, some of these middle tier schools starting to get the upper hand against the more prominent programs. But not only that, the Twitter account also had me glued with UMBC. I mean, you could see that the guy just had a lot of confidence. Whoever was running it, he was also just beaming with pride, seeing this historic moment, and he was just living in the moment. And also the exchange that he had with Kansas State, trying to rub it in there. But it was quite a run, even though it ended in the second round. But I mean, I have to put this up there with Super Bowl III. I also have to put this up there with the Miracle on Ice. I think this was that moment for college basketball, seeing the 16 beat a 1.
And you mentioned it. I think UMBC just capitalized on that perfectly. I don't know if it was just the one guy running the show there on the social media account, but you got to kind of strike when the iron is hot, and that is exactly what they did. They let their social media person just kind of run with it, and it's turned UMBC into kind of a household name, at least for this week. Everybody kind of knows UMBC. You bring that up, you're going to think about that 16-over-1 matchup probably for years to come. So, if you don't have that ability, you kind of say, let's just keep it low, maybe send out a couple tweets with scores, updates, blah, blah, blah. You kind of get over it. But with what they did social media-wise, you kind of embed UMBC into the culture for this week and maybe beyond. So that was really cool.
Even the Baltimore Ravens got behind UMBC as well. So.
Everybody. I saw, I think it was 10,000 followers or something like that when I first saw the account. I don't know where it's at now. I think it's probably over close to 100,000 or something like that. So
I'm one of them.
That's millions of dollars in publicity that they generated with the win, with how they handled it through the media, social media, all that stuff. So I think they did just right. Even though they did lose that second game to Kansas State, they handled that perfectly, and I think they generated a lot of revenue and publicity for that school with what they did.
They lost that second game, but it was close.
Yeah.
And they just annihilated Virginia by 20 points, the number 1 seed. I mean, it had to be an embarrassment, bigger embarrassment than when Virginia lost to Chaminade, because at least in that game, Ralph Sampson back then was injured. That was their excuse then. They had no excuse this time. When you look at that South bracket, that you talk about bracket busters, that is all broken. That's just your highest seed left is Kentucky, and people are saying now they've got the easiest road to the championship, and that may be true. This bracket, the South, has a 5, a 7, a 9, and 11. They got all the odd numbers. 5, 7, 9, 11. Nevada there is at 7. You can't count them out. They're going to go against another Cinderella, Loyola Chicago. So that is probably the most entertaining bracket left. The West has a 3, 4, a 7, and 9. So that again, there were bracket busters there, although 3 and 4 have made it through. But then you come over to the other side, that the South and the West will play for 1 spot in the national championship game. I think that's where everybody's attention is going to be. In the East and Midwest, the East is almost nothing. You got 1, 2, 3, and 5. So only the 4 seed, Wichita State, went out, and they went out early as an upset to a 13 seed Marshall, but Marshall couldn't keep it up, so you got Villanova, Purdue, Texas Tech at 1, 2, and 3, and a 5 in West Virginia. And then the Midwest has a 1, 2, 5, and 11. And 11 is Syracuse. Nobody would consider Jim Boeheim's team ever to be a Cinderella.
Yeah.
However, they if they go all the way, they would be the first play-in team to win the national championship, because they had to play one more game. They had to beat Arizona State just to get into the 64-team bracket. So they're they're in the Sweet 16, trying to make it to the Elite 8. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and one of the things is if it was all the 1, 2, 3, 4s, everybody be going ho hum, but we've still got teams like Loyola, Chicago, Nevada, Texas A&M at a 7 seed, Syracuse at an 11, Butler at a 10. Oh no, Butler's gone. They got beat by Purdue. So, but Syracuse at 11. You still got some interest in underdogs, but as usual, one of the 1s or 2s will probably end up being favored.
Can't also forget about Sister Jean, who's also getting a lot of attention along with UMBC.
I think a lot of basketball fans are going to remember the UMBC Virginia upset for a while. Yeah. Of course, the prime reason probably is because it was the first time the 16 ever beat a 1. A lot of people were probably thinking, well, it was inevitable, it would happen someday. Well, this was the year. But also the way they did it, as Elliot said, it was by 20 points, and if you watch the last 3 minutes or so, as the game was getting more and more out of hand from Virginia's point of view, it seemed to me that the Virginia defenders would try for the quick steal, and when they didn't get it, they gave up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They'd stand there as UMBC was making an easy layup. Then you have 2 household college basketball names, Syracuse and Duke, playing in a Sweet 16 game with Syracuse as a play-in team and a number 11 seed, and another household name, Kentucky, is in the Sweet 16 as a number 5 seed, and then 2 virtual unknowns, two very intriguing virtual unknowns for this. Loyola of Chicago, that team's captured my imagination actually, and Nevada. I think maybe not a great tournament, but certainly a very interesting one, I think.
I will add this about Syracuse being a play-in. VCU was the last play-in to make a near run, managed to get to the Final Four. Unfortunately, they lost to Butler, so maybe it could be the case for the Orange.
And sticking with Nevada, one of those kind of Cinderella teams to make it this far. They didn't win their conference tournament. They were probably the best team in the Mountain West throughout the season, but here they are as a number 7 team, came back from 22 points down to Cincinnati, and they have Elijah Cooks on the team. It's a kid we talked about on the show previously when he was at Atascadero, went to Nevada for football. Injuries, whatever happens over there at Nevada, they call on him to come over from the football team and play some basketball, and here he is in the Sweet 16. A kid with Santa Maria roots, went to St. Joseph before he went to Atascadero. His sister Mariah Cooks played basketball at Rigetti, played basketball at Washington State, and here he is making a tournament run. Hasn't seen a minute on the floor in the tournament, but it's just a crazy story to see all that happen. It's just one of those cool stories. You see Elijah Cooks on TV, you're like, hey, there he is, getting some close-ups, playing in the tournament. It's just got to be a crazy thing for him. And he was a great basketball player at Atascadero, so he's got to love this, to have that opportunity to play in the tournament. It's just got to be great for him, and it's a fun story.
Yeah, this is a Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates type story when you really think about it, because 2 tight ends, they try to balance. I know in Tony Gonzalez's case, he was a 2-sport guy, whereas Antonio Gates, he went to Kent State, which, I mean, I don't think he ever saw the football field over there at all. But, this is almost similar when you really think about it.
Yeah, he definitely could be an elite tight end with some of those basketball skills he had. I think when he was here, just a year ago playing high school basketball, he was definitely the best dunker in the area. So he has some ability, but Nevada doesn't really need him at this point with the Martin twins that they have. Jordan Caroline's been a good player for them, so they haven't needed him yet, but maybe they'll have, Eric Musselman, the coach, will need him in a pinch, and they'll call on him. We'll see Elijah Cooks go from a kid that was playing basketball and football at St. Joseph and Atascadero to playing in a Sweet 16 game or even more. So I think it's just a crazy story. And I don't remember the last time we had a local kid in the tournament and making a deep run in the tournament. It's just a unique story. So it's really cool to see.
I think Joel Smith comes to mind. Granted, Joel Smith never really saw the court all that much at Washington, but he's a name that comes to mind.
Right.
Yeah, Derek Jasper from Paso, kind of a similar, northern area kind of school. went to Kentucky, and I don't know if he ever saw the tournament there, but I think he also played at UNLV. I'm sure they made the tournament when he was there, so it's kind of that was probably 12 years ago or something like that. So maybe that was the last time that we've seen a guy who has area ties making the tournament and making a run. I think maybe we'll see JoJo Walker there at some point. He had a great freshman season over there at Portland. Maybe he'll get in the tournament at some point, but it's cool to see Elijah Cooks, a kid that we've seen play, on basketball courts all over the area. It's cool. Maybe Quentin Adlish can make it there with Columbia one year. He's done a really good job over there at Columbia, but to see Elijah Cooks, a guy who didn't go to college to play basketball, being in the Sweet 16 is just a rare and unique story, and I think it's a lot of fun. A fun thing to talk about. And that's all we got for this week. Remember, all area stuff for the boys basketball season is coming out in Sunday's paper. You can catch that stuff online Saturday night. And then next week's show, we'll talk about some of our all-area girls selections, and then you can catch the all-area girls package the following Sunday in the Santa Maria Times. Thank you guys for watching 805 Sports Talk.